What if I told you that you can build a complete web app with just HTML? Yeah, you can make your website interactive, dynamic, make API requests and all that with just HTMX. Wait, I say that right, it's HTMX. But it's still HTML, without any JavaScript. I have questions like you too. And that's why I have here with me Khalid, Developer Advocate at JetBrains for .NET C# writer. Khalid is the HTMX guy. He's built incredible web apps with just HTML. Well, HTMX. You know what? Khalid is going to be answering all our questions. I'm going to be asking these questions on your behalf because I'm also trying to learn HTMX too. And he's going to be teaching us HTMX and how we can build web apps without JavaScript. So let's get started with it. Hey Khalid, it's so good to have you here. How have you been?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. I've been watching you. Sounds creepy, but I've been watching you on Twitter, doing your videos and interacting with the Nigerian community, and it's very cool. So, thank you for asking me to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much too. Khalid is a very interesting person and well knowledgeable in .NET. If you know him on Twitter, you always know him. You'll see his tweets about Rider, and everyone in the .NET community knows him by now. I think you have over 8,000 followers on Twitter. That's a lot. I mean, you can start the country with your followers right now.
Yeah, I really enjoy communicating with folks on Twitter. I do a lot of office hours and kind of interact with the .NET community. And I also create a lot of samples, .NET samples. So if you're interested in learning .NET, you can head over to my GitHub account and you can find a lot of the work that I'm doing there. So
amazing. So, and with all that, by now you know that we're going to talk about HTMX and HTMX. If you've got any kind of hint, HTMX is from HTML, and that's like front end. So how am I bringing Khalid, the .NET guy, to talk about HTMX? And that's going to be a bit, so he's going to be answering that. But okay, what's HTMX about, Khalid, and what drove your interest to HTMX?
Yeah, I guess the thing I would say is you can look at HTMX from a couple different perspectives. If you're a front-end person, you might be familiar with React or Vue or even Angular. And a lot of those frameworks end up doing a lot of work client-side. HTMX takes a different approach. HTMX realizes that server-side languages like .NET for my case, but even Django for the Python community or Laravel for PHP community. Those kind of server-side languages have a lot of strengths to them. I know right now in the front-end community, there's a lot of talk around multi-page applications because they recognize that routing on the server is a lot more robust than trying to route in the client. So you're having a lot of those conversations of what does the client do great and what does the server do great? And what HTMX says is the server does a lot that's great. Let's kind of declaratively use this library, HTMX, to create client-side experiences that maybe depend more heavily on server-side things like rendering and routing.
Sounds interesting. Yeah, sounds like it's going to be simple too. What's the X in HTMX about? Is that like HTM anything?
Well, the author of HTMX says HTMX is what he envisions HTML being if the W3C continued on, kept going and innovating HTML. So from his perspective, he feels like these are the features that could be part of the HTML spec, but aren't there yet.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that the people watching this, they're probably wondering how you'd compare HTMX with other front-end frameworks. Like if even Jquery, is it close to Jquery? Is it closer to Jquery or to React or Vue? Which is it closer to?
So how does HTMX kind of stack up against different frameworks? Specifically, let's start with the OG of JavaScript frameworks or libraries, Jquery. funny enough, HTMX has a lot of the same functionality that jQuery has in terms of selectors and those kind of things. So you can actually use HTMX partly to replace jQuery because it has that functionality, but that's not really its purpose. It's just there to kind of help reduce some of that. jQuery is more like a multi-purpose library. I wouldn't compare jQuery with HTMX in that sense, but there is some overlap. I think the comparison people really want is between something like a Vue or React comparison, right?
Okay.
And again, when you end up choosing something like Vue or React, you end up building your client-side experiences with those frameworks and with those stacks, leaning heavily on doing a lot on the client side, right? So a lot of your logic starts to end up on the client side. You end up treating your backend like a JSON repository where you kind of call it and it returns JSON back, whether you're using REST or GraphQL. So that's really not the case with HTMX. When you're using HTMX, when you call an endpoint, the normal expectation is that that endpoint will return HTML fully formed and will replace it in place on the page. So there's less logic on the front side.
Most of the logic is happening on the back end. All the logic most of the logic happens on the back end, and then HTMX helps us generate the. Is it HTMX that's helping us generate the HTML code, or we are the ones to do it with whatever technology we want?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So HTMX, the philosophy is called HOWL, HOWL, which stands for HTML over whatever you like. Right? So HTMX itself doesn't force you to use any backend technology per se. But like you alluded to, a lot of the logic and view building happens on the backend. So whether your language is JavaScript, whether you're using Node as a backend and you're using something like Express, and what's the default client, or what's the default templating in Express? Is it Nunjux or Pug?
Should be Pug. Those, I don't remember. That's been years since I used it. Yeah.
Well, whatever view templating engine you like, you can use on the back end and return HTML. For .NET folks, it's regularly a language called Razor. So it's a mix of C# with HTML that really allows you to do things like split out HTML into partial views and kind of reuse those kind of things. So that's really the biggest difference, I would say, between something like a React or a Vue or Angular versus HTMX.
Okay, so let me understand
HTMX
this.
is very thin.
So your idea, let me see if I can get this right. Your idea of working with HTMX is like working with Express and its template engine instead of working with Express and then a front end application. So Express is doing the job of sending JSON, and then that's front end is handling it. So it's more of Express and its template engine, just straightforward right there. You do everything you want with all the possible client side capabilities, right?
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm saying. I will say too, right? Like one of the benefits and one of the downsides of maybe writing client-side apps where everything happens on the client, you don't always have access to all the data that you need. And there's a lot of sensitive data on the back end that may help you build a particular view, but you don't want to send client-side, right? And that sensitive information can all stay on the back end to help you build this HTML snippets that ultimately get sent. So you can really take advantage of things like your database or your third-party services and not expose that data. So I would say that's a big strength of HTMX.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so with HTMX now, is it possible to build like a complete front-end app without JavaScript?
Yeah, so technically, yes, you can do it. So if you can see my screen right now, I'll show you, we'll go through the HTMX site so we can talk about some of the features. But when you come to the HTMX site, you'll notice that HTMX, to install it, is just a basic script tag. So you don't actually have to set up any build pipelines or anything like that. So whether you're using Gulp, Webpack, Rollup, Parcel, whatever one you want to use, you can still use it, but it's not really going to do a lot for you when it comes to HTMX. So this is kind of perfect for me as a backend person who maybe doesn't want the added complexity of setting up that build pipeline, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So wait, what kind of developers would you recommend to use HTMX? Like, what class of developers do you think HTMX was made for? Is it the people who are heavy on backend, or the people who are heavy on front end, or both?
It's interesting, right? Like, I think it's for everybody. I know maybe that's a that's a cop-out answer, but I would say everybody. Let's start with backend folks, right? If you're a backend person and you really love your backend stack, whether it's ASP.NET Core, Laravel, Express, pick your technology stack of choice.
Yeah.
If you love working in that, HTMX is great because you can kind of layer on this functionality without abandoning everything that you love, right? So for backend folks, it's perfect in that sense. You can just kind of layer some basic client-side functionality on top of what you already have.
Okay.
For front-end folks, you don't have to abandon all your Vue and React work that you've done, but you also find that sometimes you have a lot of pages that are kind of static. There's not really a lot of client interaction on these static pages. So you can lean on HTML to write these static pages and then also layer in some HTMX to potentially, say, make a form submission dynamic. And then you handle that. Yeah.
Oh,
and then you can handle that using, say, like, go ahead.
Yeah, we can use like HTMX with other front-end frameworks. HTMX inside of React or HTMX inside of Vue. So,
yeah.
Okay, that's.
I will say too, like, the nice thing about HTMX is you start thinking about your pages in terms of components and sections and interactions. And for me, that's really powerful because I love static site generators. I use Jekyll heavily. I also like what's happening in the JavaScript community around things like Astro and 11t.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
And HTMX is perfect for that. I know I've been talking a lot about the backend side of things, but the backend can literally be anything. If you're generating static files and putting them in blob storage or in an S3 bucket, you can still grab those HTML snippets and load them in when you want to load them in. So it's really flexible in terms of that approach.
So with HTMX, does the backend have to send over HTML to the front end, or can we do JSON?
Yeah, I mean,
by the way, is it JSON or JSON? What do you call it? JSON or JSON?
Oh, JSON. Yeah.
JSON. Oh.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I know a lot of the JavaScript community now are leaning closer to GraphQL and moving maybe away from JSON over HTTP endpoints. And you don't actually have to abandon any of those APIs that you've built or dependent on, whether you built them yourself or they're third party. We'll see a demo when I start going through code.
Okay.
You can actually take advantage of any existing APIs that return JSON, and then you can have HTMX run a templating language, say like Mustache, to transform that into HTML on the client side. So HTMX is really flexible from that perspective.
It's like having HTMX on the server. HTMX receives the JSON. HTMX generates HTML and then sends that to the client.
So your backend generates the HTML, and then you decorate declaratively the HTMX attributes on your HTML.
But
so
isn't that like having a new backend? A new backend.
Is it?
Yeah.
So you're asking, is it like having a new backend?
At the end of the day, we don't have to rewrite our existing backend, but then we'll have to write a new backend to do the job of generating HTML.
Yeah, you can do that. There's kind of a debate around what you should do if you have an existing backend and what does that backend do. HTML is always going to be the preferred return value for HTMX because it's just swapping elements into the DOM, which is super simple. But there are extensions where you don't have to build a brand new backend. You can continue to use client-side templating, but obviously you're going to get a performance hit because you're trying to create HTML on every single client that calls you. So maybe the non-answer to your question is it really depends. It depends what your backend is. And I was going to answer your question before. You said you can write client-side experiences without having to write any JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
And you can. HTMX has really it's one library, HTMX, but it also has a sister library called HyperScript. And HyperScript lets you write this kind of syntax right on elements. So let me zoom in here so you can see it. But you can add this underscore into any HTML element, and you can say, well, when somebody clicks this, so on click, go ahead and toggle this class on this element.
That's really interesting. That's an inbuilt feature. That looks really interesting. This is nice. And it reads like English language. It's readable. Yeah, it can actually hook into really any kind of JavaScript events and stuff like that. So here we have a element that says if I hover, go ahead and toggle the visibility. So you can see. Right. And this is like inside of HTML, not JSX or anything like this.
Yep. So this is all happening. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, but if I put this in my ID, would my ID start shouting that it doesn't know about toggle or any of these new attributes?
Well, I guess that's kind of the nice thing, but also the downside is like this language has its own syntax. So in our JetBrains IDEs, you could sit down, and I was actually thinking about doing this myself. We could sit down and create this language based on its syntax, and then our IDEs would recognize it somewhat. But on the plus side, these are just this is just an HTML attribute. So currently our IDEs just treat this like a string value, right?
Yeah. So even if
classes or something.
Even if the IDE flags it as an error, it's still going to work.
Oh yeah. Yep. I think to me it's like HyperScript is very cool, but yeah, it takes a little bit of effort to kind of learn HyperScript.
Okay.
I know you'd asked me recently, like, how long did it take you to learn HTMX? Right?
Yeah.
And if you exclude HyperScript, HTMX itself, I think you can learn it in about 30 minutes, and you'd have the basics.
But before you move on, if I want to learn HTMX in that 30 minutes, what are the main features of HTMX I need to know?
Yeah, so HTMX works off of the HTTP methods that everyone's used to. If you're building web applications, you're likely used to GET requests, POST requests. So looking at this sample here, we have a button and we decorate our element with hx and then the HTTP method that we want to execute. So in this case, it's a post. And then you have this attribute of swap, which says when the response returns from the server, I want to swap this element from the outer HTML, meaning I want to replace the entire element with the response. So to really learn HTMX, you just kind of have to learn the basic attributes and understand what they do. And
do all HTMX attributes start with HX? Because I can say HX trigger, HX target, HX swap. Is that like the way to know it's an HTMX attribute?
Yeah, so the author of HTMX did a good job in terms of making sure that there's a prefix on all the attributes, and it's HX typically. So you're not going to have any collisions with any other attributes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So this is really nice. I can take my HTML code and send data and request for data inside of my HTML code, get that data and put it inside of my HTML code, like swap it with something else. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's to kind of clue you in on the thought process again of the author. Traditionally in HTML, there's only a couple elements that can really trigger web requests, right? You have anchor tags, so the anchor tag here. You also have forms, right? So forms can do get or post method requests, right? Well, in his design, he's like, why can't every single HTML element have the option to make a web request, right? And it might sound a little like crazy mad scientist, but it actually ends up working out really well because you can create these points of interaction throughout your HTML page, and it doesn't just have to be, say, like a form or an anchor tag. So. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I think you're going to explain it when we go back to the code. I was just going to ask, this hx post equal to /clicked, like HTMX knows that, that's for the trigger attribute. Okay, I said that right there. So the trigger for making that request is the click event. So can we do like hover, hx trigger equal to hover, and when we hover on an element, that makes a request? Is that what's the limit? Or what are the possibilities?
Yes. So the cool thing about HTMX, specifically triggers, right? So whenever we think about building UI, especially for user experiences, we're constantly thinking about the user performing an action on our UI, whether they're clicking, scrolling, all those kind of things. But HTMX is just using JavaScript. So any event that happens on the page can trigger a web request to your backend. So you can even programmatically set an interval, and every 5 seconds it could trigger an event, and HTMX could hear that event and start changing your UI based on that. So really the sky's the limit in terms of how you can trigger HTMX to start doing functionality.
This looks pretty straightforward though. How difficult does it get? Does it get more difficult than this, or if I want to build an app with HTMX, is it still going to be this straightforward, or does it get complex?
Okay, so this is where we should jump into code, because I have a sample code that people can download and kind of progressively go from beginner to big brain HTMX developer. Let's jump into the code. Again, I'm using ASP.NET Core, but whatever backend you want to use or anybody else wants to use, they're welcome to use that. But let's go to Rider and we'll see. When folks download this project, they're going to notice a couple C# ASP.NET Core projects in the solution. This JetSwag store we'll look at later, but this is kind of a complete sample using everything you learn from the exercises in this project. But the first thing we're going to start with, it's kind of an obligatory thing. You have to have a Hello World example. So
by the way, your IDE looks good. Is this the default rider theme?
Oh yeah. Everyone always asks.
People always ask that question. Yeah, okay, yeah, go on.
Yeah, everyone always asks. The nice thing is, let's see. Yep, this is Rider Dark. If you're coming from WebStorm, Darkula's here. Also, if you have WebStorm users, the Rider theme pack is available in the plugin store. So you can have the Rider experience even if you're not using Rider. It's kind of nice. But yeah.
That's nice.
So this is our Hello World sample, and I'm looking at the completed sample here. When you download this project, there's actually two versions of the exercises, one that's completed with the solution, and another one that kind of lets you fill in your own solution. If when my HTMX course comes out, people can follow along through the start exercise. But let's walk through the Hello World sample and kind of show what we were looking at on the website in action. So actually, give me a second here. Let us start the sample, and we can look at it side by side. So this is our Hello World example here on the left. This is actually Razor syntax. So anyone who's not familiar with ASP.NET Core, we have a view engine called Razor. And what Razor is, it's a combination of HTML and C#. It allows you to do some interesting things. One of those things is actually you can create your own tags. And in this sample, I actually have a markdown tag that allows me to, render markdown onto the page. So it looks like HTML, but its looks can be deceiving in this case. We can see here on the right-hand side, there's a goal that we have in mind. We want to be able to click this button, and we want to change the text that says change me, right? So the way to do that is the first thing we do is we pick our HTTP method. In this case, we want to make a GET request, right? So when someone clicks this button, we want to make a GET request, and then the target, we call the server, it's going to return an HTML snippet. Where do we want to put that HTML snippet? Well, that's what HX target is about. And this takes a CSS selector. So up here, if we look up, our header tag, the H2, has an identifier, an ID of target. Yep. So, do you want me to click the button?
Yeah. Let's see.
All right, let's click it. Do you believe? Do you have faith, Ebenezer, or?
Oh, well, I'm looking at line 32 right now, and I'm seeing that we're trying to make a GET request to that's an empty string. Is that going to have any impact on what we're trying to do?
Okay, let me click it, and then I'll explain to you why that's empty. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. Oh, that worked.
That worked, right?
Yeah.
So why did I leave GET empty here? Well, in the case of most in the case of most method calls in HTML, if a value is left empty, it's basically shorthand for saying, hey, call the same endpoint/page that I'm currently on. So this is basically like saying having this route in here without needing to type it, right?
Why do we need to call it though? If we take out line 32, is our application still going to work? The click me button.
Well, it's not going to work, right? Because if you think about it, we still need to tell HTMX, hey, what type of method do we want to call the server with? In this case, we still need to say, hey, it's a GET request, right?
Okay.
So
yeah.
We talked about HTMX needing some kind of backend service. Would you like to see the backend?
Just 1 second before that, let me be clear on this. Click on the button again, the click me button. Where we getting oh, I think that's what you want to show me right now. Where we're getting hello world, right?
Exactly. So we're getting it from the back end. If I open, so again, this is depending on your technology stack of choice, but this is Razor pages with ASP.NET Core. There's typically a what we call a code behind. In this case, if I hide this is what we call the page model. This page model handles requests, and you can see that I have an onGet method. Let me let me bring this up larger. So when a request comes in, I'm using a NuGet package that I wrote to determine if the request coming in is performed by HTMX. If it is performed by HTMX, I end up returning this HTML snippet here as content. So yeah, we return this snippet. I'm also using a nice little language injection feature here. So I'm saying, hey, this snippet is HTML, and Rider recognizes that as well.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a nice feature, yeah.
So if the request isn't performed by HTMX, say a regular page load, like somebody navigated to this page, just go ahead and render the page like you normally would, right?
Okay.
So
okay, I get that now, yeah.
So you can actually see this in action. If we open up the DevTools here, I'm going to click this, and we're going to see a request come through. Let me zoom in so we can see it. DevTools. Let me shrink this. But you can see the response on the request is just that span that we can see here.
Hello world, yeah.
Inside.
Yeah. What's the text that's after hello world? After the comma, we have text there.
Oh, yeah. So this is another part of ASP.NET Core. When you return this content, when you call this content method, which returns a content result, you need to specify the content type. So in this case, I could be explicit and just say content type, right?
Oh, okay.
So in theory, this could be, like text CSV or, but
this is like this reminds me of making the JSON request too, where we have to specify the content type.
Yeah, so like that's kind of how you do it with ASP.NET Core. JSON is pretty common, so you can also return just JSON. JSON. Oh, this is a Razor page. So traditionally, if you're using MVC, you could do that, but you can do that here as well. But okay, so let's move to a more complex demo, right? Like this is kind of a toy right now, right? Are you impressed?
I am. I am actually. We've done our first. I feel like I know HTMX already. We've done our first hello world click me button interaction where we were able to send a request, get HTML data, and put that in our website. I'm impressed.
Yeah, and that's really the entirety of HTMX, right? Like it's more about the strategy of how do you break your page down so that you can think about functionality that way. But the actual mechanics of HTMX are really, really straightforward and simple. And I think really anyone can kind of grasp at least the basics of HTMX. So let's move to a more complex demo. Let's move on to our second example here. This is about managing state. And I'll actually go to the code as well here so we can see it. And just like our previous example, we have our Razor page, which has HTML in it. And we're using a different HTTP method this time. And we have a target down here that we're going to increment as we click the button. And yeah, let's look at the back end before we kind of just start clicking and see what happens. Yeah, so here's our page model, which is kind of what's holding the state of our page. And I have this static variable of count. Full disclaimer, a lot of these demos shouldn't be deployed to production. They'll work for you on your local machine, but this isn't production code. This is obviously demo code. So we have a static count variable here. This will actually maintain our state for the page. And every time we reload the page, it's just going to set the count back to 0, right? That way we can kind of create a reproducible demo. And then every time we click this button, we're going to post to the page and we're going to increment the count by 1, right? And then again, here you see we're returning it as text HTML.
Okay. So this is like, since a lot, I can say that like probably literally all the work happens in the backend. So would you recommend, like what you just did right here, having both the backend and the front end in one code base when working with HTMX?
Yeah, I mean, I would like the whole point of HTMX is to kind of like help bridge the gap that's kind of formed between front end and back end, and to help you build applications that maybe are easier to maintain over the long run. Whether that's true or not, I think that's going to be on a case-by-case basis, but I think that's the spirit of HTMX. So, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
That makes sense.
You ready? You ready to count some numbers,
Yeah.
Ebenezer?
Let's try that.
All right. All right. We got one. How about another?
So that's working.
Another one. I'm channeling DJ Khalid. Another one.
And that fits well with your name, by the way. Yeah, that's true. So this works well. Okay, what if we want what if we want to like persist this data? Let's say in the browser's local storage or IndexedDB. I want to reload my page and still see 6.
Yeah, so this is the interesting part, right? So if you want to save state, there's a lot of back-end database systems that you probably should store state in. So if you're in the Microsoft world or the .NET world, you're probably going to be using something like Microsoft SQL Server. That's likely where you want to manage a user's state. If you're in the open source world, maybe something like Postgres or MySQL for the backend would be great. Those are great options. You could also use Firebase as well. So those kind of things, if you're interested. For client side, if you want to maintain the state of the page client side so that it's just for the user, you're going to have to write that local DB access using JavaScript. So,
okay.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the things to bring up about HTMX. Just because you're using HTMX doesn't mean you have to abandon JavaScript completely, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like accessing local storage and caching things client side, using IndexedDB and stuff like that. Yeah, you still want to use JavaScript for those things and interact with HTMX that way. So.
So so it's same way we would call functions in HTML. That's the same way we can call them in HTMX, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, so
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if I were as a JavaScript developer, if I wanted to use HTMX, I'm gonna still be using Node.js on the backend, so it's still JavaScript.
Mm-hmm. What is the what's the most popular database in the Node.js world? I don't know.
That should be as far as I know, for SQL is Postgres, and then for NoSQL is MongoDB. As far as I know, but a lot of people have different preferences, though.
Yeah, so use those databases and take full advantage of them. I think, especially when you compare what those databases can do, things like full text search and indexing based on particular fields and things like that. Those databases are just going to be way more robust than what you can do in local storage, right? So,
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, you want to move to the next demo?
Yeah. Sure.
All right. So here in my next demo, and by the way, we'll just do this demo, and then folks can check out the rest of the samples if they're interested. So the next demo, this is something a lot of folks want to add because it creates a great client-side experience. And it helps users get to information faster and kind of navigate an app easier, it's typically type-ahead search, right? Everyone's seen this, whether you've seen it on Amazon, whether you've seen it on Google. You start typing and things start to happen as you type, right? We have a table here. I'm going to stretch this out so people can see it a little better, but we have a table here filled with retro video games. Everybody loves video games, right? So if you start typing, you can see that we're filtering data based on what I type. So if you're a Nintendo fanboy, you can see all the games published and created by Nintendo. If you're more of a Sega person, you can type Sega, and you can see we have Sonic the Hedgehog, Outrun, and one of my personal favorites, Streets of Rage. So do you want to see how this is implemented?
Sure, very interested. I want to see how I've been suffering for years.
Your suffering ends today, my man. So we have an input here. This is the Razor side of the equation, right? We have, again, we have ASP.NET Core Razor syntax here, and we're binding to this element called query. It's a property.
Okay.
If we actually head back, let's type Sonic. You can actually see the query is replaced in the header here, so you can actually see it in the bar. If we this is another nice feature, and I'll show you how it's done, but if I refresh the page, you can see that the query string is still there, but my page loads with the initial result set, right?
Yeah. So we can even directly edit Sonic there to Sega or any other thing we want in the URL bar.
Yeah, this is a great feature because in a way you can share this link with somebody and you've managed to maintain state, right?
Yeah.
The other nice side effect of this is if you're building, say, like a shopping site that needs to be scanned by a bunch of crawlers, your links all still work. They're not dependent fully on the client-side experience, which is nice.
Okay. That's true.
Okay, let's head back. So we have our query. You saw that was being passed in the URL. I've turned off autocomplete because it's just annoying, and your viewers don't need to see my search history. That's So again, we have the HX get, which we want to make a get request. And here we're using ASP.NET Core Razor again to generate a link, right? So maybe to explain this to folks who are not familiar with the ASP.NET Core, we have this thing called a URL helper, and we can actually ask it, this is a page, we want to generate a link specifically to this page. So typically in an ASP.NET Core app, we have a bunch of pages and endpoints and controllers, and we may decide to change those routes over time. So rather than trying to hard code a URL in here, which can be like, it can break as you kind of reorganize your application. It's easier to ask the registered routes, hey, give me what link this thing has in the system.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure other backend systems also have link generation built into them, so it's very similar to that. Again, we have our target. Our target is going to be our body down here. I'll show you that then, because I think this is where it starts to get really, really interesting for folks. And we talked about triggers, right? We've talked about clicking things. We've talked about changing the input. But here we actually have a custom trigger. This says, hey, on key up, trigger the changed event, but only do it after 250 milliseconds when nothing else has occurred, right?
So that's like debouncing.
Exactly. Yep, you got it. Got it. We also have a loading indicator. The truth is this isn't necessary because it happens so fast, but there's a fun little Pac-Man image here that will kind of chomp away if the search takes too long. But yeah, that's really it. Like these 4 elements, and we've implemented type ahead search. Let's go look at the results. So again, we're still in the backend and we're still doing Razor. And whatever the search results are, as long as we have results, this is kind of what this syntax means. We go through and we loop through all the games and we just render the row elements like HTML. So, by the way, this @ here is like, it's a specific symbol for Razor. Anytime you see this is you're transitioning from HTML over into C#.
Just like having, just like wrapping JavaScript in braces when you're writing JSX code.
Exactly.
For like
Yep,
React.
exactly. You got it. So yeah, like this is kind of what's being rendered on the server. Let's look at the C# because C# is just as simple. Again, we have our database on the server. We have our query string that gets bound every time somebody sends a request. So here's our query. And then we just filter the list. So given if we have a query, given our list of games, we just say, hey, does this query, is it contained within any of the games in our list? And then we get a bunch of results back and we return that result set back.
Okay.
By the way, this is another neat thing about HTMX. It looks at response headers. So you can do things like, in this case, I'm pushing each query into the history of the browser, the client-side browser.
Oh, okay.
So every time a request completes, we actually change the history in the browser to reflect the new query, right? Does that make sense?
And then if we hit the back button, we can go to the previous request, right?
Exactly. Yep. Man, you're turning into an HTMX expert. I love it.
Yeah, I'm gonna start building SaaS with HTMX after this video.
So here's where it gets interesting, right? Like in all the other previous examples, I was building HTML in C# code. But if you're using ASP.NET Core, you can actually lean on the view engine. So if someone is using Express or Django, they might want to lean on their view engine. And in this case, I'm rendering a partial. And the partial in this case is this underscore results that we saw over here. Right?
Okay.
So when we initially load the page, we're also using that partial to render the initial page load. And this is kind of the strength of HTMX for me, is like you can use your partials both for initial page loads and subsequent like HTMX requests. And the logic doesn't, like the logic isn't any different in your partials, whether it's an HTMX request or whether it's the initial page load. There's nothing in here that's unique to HTMX. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
I mean, what are your thoughts as someone who does JavaScript? Like, what's your feeling about, like, technically there's no difference between client side and server side because it's just HTML.
That's going to take some getting used to, like a mind shift from the way we've been doing things. But I think that once, like if I get used to it, then it's going to be easier for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you'll also find like you can spend more of your time developing like functionality on the back end and then exposing it. I have a sample that folks can go check out. We're probably not going to do it in this video because it would put this video over like 5 hours at this point.
Yeah.
But for folks who are interested, they can check out a validation sample where the validation happens server side, but it looks like a client side experience. I think that's a cool demo. So if folks are interested in that, they should just definitely check out the GitHub repo to see that sample in action.
Well, that was incredible. You know, we had a lot of technical issues when recording this. At the point, my memory card got full, so my camera stopped recording. Khalid's camera got frozen, but we were still able to give you good HTMX content. And I'm sure you learned a lot because I learned a lot. I feel like an HTMX expert right now. But let me know in the comment section below. Do you want to see more HTMX content from us? Do you want us to give you the part we recorded that we couldn't add to the video because it became so long? Let me know in the comment section below. I want to know your thought on HTMX. What do you think about HTMX? Do you want to start using HTMX today? Do you want to see more HTMX content? Let us know. See you by next video. Bye.